It began with the smooth hum of atmospheric stabilizers and the subdued whisper of academic decorum. Inside the Grand Convergence Hall of the Zenthari Research Satellite Orbit Prime, an awestruck crowd of over 200 delegates, scientists, and diplomatic observers from 87 star systems sat in ringed tiers. They wore everything from containment domes to breathable silk coils, representing the astonishing diversity of species gathered for the annual Intergalactic Symposium on Chemical Sciences. The floor shimmered with reactive glass, glowing softly with data trails, and in the center stood Professor Zirthal, a gangly, towering scholar from the Dexari Corps, with translucent skin that refracted the lights into soft rainbows. His 12 fingers were steepled as he addressed the audience in fluent galactic trade tongue. "Ladies, entities, and sapient masses," he began, nodding graciously toward a floating jelly thought from the Slarv quadrant. "Today, we open the symposium's first demonstration, the harmless, controlled chemical reaction showcase. Our goal is to explore low-impact, educational displays of fundamental chemistry from each represented species. No hazards, no combustion. A celebration of restraint and elegance." A rustling of excitement passed through the tiers. Alien teams whispered to one another, plasma coils were primed, and cryo chambers clicked open. Among them, near the far back wedged between a shimmering Zeph plantoid and a sour-smelling Grault, sat a single human, Riley Bennett, mid-20s, exchange scholar, mild sunburn still visible on the bridge of his nose, and a habit of bouncing his knee when nervous. Right now, the knee was practically a blur. He glanced down at the makeshift carrier bag resting by his feet. Inside, a roll of mint Mentos and a sealed 2-liter bottle of cola he'd begged off a supply shuttle from the Mars outpost last week. He gulped. This had seemed funny back on Earth. Even his chemistry professor had laughed. "You'll kill," she'd said, not realizing how literally that could be interpreted in interstellar company. Now, as he scanned the room full of dignitaries, some with exposed neural webs, others in biosuits, he felt the weight of absolute, irrevocable miscalculation. Next up, the delegation of Eltari Prime, announced the AI moderator. A half-dozen bioluminescent beings unfolded spindly wings and activated a photonic synthesizer. Brilliant waves of light formed complex geometric patterns, inducing a mild euphoria in the audience. Then came the Krovith Coalition's cryo-vaporizer, a cube of methane ice collapsing into a halo of fog that sang. One by one, the species dazzled with intricate, majestic displays. The crowd murmured with delight. "Earth representative," the AI intoned. "Riley Bennett." He froze. The Zeph plant next to him swayed and gave off a faint cucumber scent, either support or pity, he wasn't sure. Riley stood, forced a grin, and picked up his bag. As he walked down the luminous aisle, whispers began slightly delayed by translation tech, but unmistakable. "He carries no equipment." "Is that a beverage?" "I smell carbon syrup." Riley stepped onto the platform, placed the bottle carefully in the center, and looked up at the room of impossibly brilliant alien minds waiting to see the human contribution to chemistry. "Hi," he said, scratching his head, eyes darting to Professor Xirthal, who looked intrigued, confused, possibly concerned. "So, this is a terrestrial reaction involving carbonated liquids and surface tension disruption. Low temp, exothermic potential, negligible. Completely safe, mostly." He held up the Mentos. "Just one question. Y'all got any towels?" A ripple of unease passed through the audience. No response. Riley sighed and knelt beside the bottle, muttering to himself. "All right, this works on Earth. No reason it shouldn't work here. Gravity's similar. Pressures within tolerance. Just don't let the Vesht be in the splash zone." He peeled open the Mentos roll. The scent of sugar filled the chamber. A group of translucent winged Menthari recoiled slightly. With one last deep breath, Riley dropped 5 Mentos into the soda bottle. There was a moment of silence. Then, the world exploded. The cola surged upward in a pillar of violent, brown froth, shattering the calm like a plasma grenade in a tea party. The geyser screamed past the high ceiling, struck the ventilation arch, and immediately triggered the facility's air filter purge protocol. 3 filters burst with a crackle of sparks. A Zentari scholar's neural uplink sparked and shorted out, causing her to flail wildly in her harness. Worse, a spray of sticky soda arced toward the Vesht Consortium's ambassador, a tall sulfur-based being wrapped in reactive robes, and landed squarely across its upper layer. The Vesht began to sizzle audibly. Screaming followed. Not Riley's. Alarms activated. A red strobe spun above the stage. Somewhere, someone shouted in 5 languages. A panicked Krillori delegate activated an emergency defense beacon, which promptly welded the access door shut and trapped 5 nervous Thulex analysts inside. Riley, now soaked to the skin and blinking away fizz from his eyelashes, raised his hands slowly. Okay, that was a bit more energetic than I remember. Symposium security arrived 2 hulking quadrupeds in hazard armor and a floating drone with restraints. I surrender, he said quickly. It's not a weapon. It's literally just candy and soda. You initiated a thermal reactional surge in the diplomatic zone, one of the guards bellowed. No, seriously, back on Earth, we do this at kids' parties. It's funny. It's just a thing we do when we're bored. A containment field snapped into place around him. Professor Xirthal was already coordinating with medical drones rushing to the Vesht, whose outer membrane was still smoking and oozing unpleasantly. And so, Riley Bennett, human, student, idiot, was officially detained for potential warfare demonstration with rudimentary terrestrial compounds. As they pulled him from the stage, he caught sight of a wide-eyed Velix delegate replaying the footage in slow motion on its cranial screen, whispering to its assistant, It's beautiful." The interrogation chamber was colder than Riley expected, not freezing, just clinically uninviting. The walls glowed a soft teal, pulsing in rhythm with some unseen ventilation system. He sat alone on a polymer bench, feet dangling a few centimeters above the floor. His socks were wet. His shirt clung to him with a persistent dampness, and the sugary scent of cola had begun to ferment into something sour and embarrassing. 20 minutes ago, he'd been on a stage. Now, he was a biochemical incident. The door hissed open. 3 figures entered. The first was a Zen-3 ethics monitor in a sterile robe, its limbs tucked behind like a folded crane. The second, an Orvellan psychological profiler whose skin changed hue depending on emotional climate, currently a very flat, displeased blue. The third, tall and insectile with 6 limbs and sharp eyes, was Commander Vrix, head of Symposium security. None of them looked like they enjoyed slapstick. Commander Vrix held a spherical tablet and tapped it sharply against the bench's edge. You detonated a reactive geyser in a zone specifically labeled non-volatility only. Explain this. I didn't detonate anything, Riley said. It's soda and mints. That's it. No ignition, no combustion, no toxins. Just carbon dioxide escaping under high pressure because of surface nucleation. Tiny pits on the Mentos accelerate bubble formation. Do not insult us with fabricated jargon, Vrix snapped. He's not lying, said the Orvellan softly, tapping a translator node. I've cross-referenced his explanation with human educational media. This reaction is widely documented. It is performed for entertainment. Vrix narrowed his eyes. Entertainment? Yeah, Riley muttered, rubbing his temples. It's a prank. Like a crowd pleaser. School kids do it. There are entire video channels dedicated to this. Children? The ethics monitor finally spoke, voice flat. Children are permitted to initiate unstable reactions in public? It's not unstable. It's messy. That's the point. It's dramatic but harmless. Usually... Harmless? Vrix pressed a button on his tablet. The chamber's side wall shimmered, revealing slow-motion footage of the eruption. The foam struck the Vesht ambassador, who immediately began dissolving his outer robes, shrieking in a high-frequency register that still echoed in Riley's bones. Sulfuric species react adversely to phosphoric acid and synthetic caramel compounds, Vrix said. Your concoction contains both. I didn't know the Vesht would stand that close, Riley said. It's not like soda has a warning label saying, keep away from diplomatic sulfur organisms. The Orvellan turned lilac, signaling curiosity. Why would your species conduct chemical events for amusement rather than empirical data? Riley hesitated. Because it makes people laugh. Or scream. I guess it's sort of both. It's chaos, but controlled. It's fun when nothing explodes for real. The ethics monitor's eyes flickered. Are all humans so recreationally volatile? He considered lying, then sighed. Yeah, kinda. The panel was silent for a moment. Then the Zenthari waved two arms and spoke into a console. You are temporarily released from confinement pending symposium review. Security clearance downgraded. No unsupervised access to compounds. And your human sustenance packages are now classified until further notice. My snacks are classified? Riley asked, standing slowly. His knee was still sore from slipping on the geyser splash. Snack-based subterfuge is not currently illegal, Vrix said, but rest assured, that is being reviewed. Riley was escorted to a containment dormitory. It had no windows and smelled faintly of sterilized clay. He sat on the edge of the cot, staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore the gentle fizzing still coming from his sticky shirt. 6 hours later. The Symposium Council had convened. Riley's demonstration, now officially termed the Carbonic Mentos event, had been reviewed from 14 angles, analyzed in thermochemical models, and cross-referenced with dozens of cultural databases. The footage had gone viral in at least 3 quadrants. On the 7th replay, the Velix representative interrupted the council with a breathless declaration. This is art, spontaneous, irreproducible chaos, the raw unpredictability of molecular theater. The Vesht ambassador is still recovering in a deacidification bath, said the Krovith representative coldly. Then, let his pain serve a purpose, said the Velix. Art always demands sacrifice. A heated debate followed. The Black Consortium demanded Earth's removal from the symposium. The Zulari proposed limiting Earth to non-reactive demonstrations involving crayons or marshmallows. The Intersect submitted a motion to study the Mentos more closely. Professor Xaerthal, seated at the head of the hall, cleared his throat. Perhaps we should hear from the human again. Back in the hall. When Riley was brought back in, the chaos had been cleaned. No trace of soda remained. The air filters were humming again, and a transparent energy barrier now encased the presentation platform, just in case. Professor Xaerthal gestured. Mr. Bennett, your demonstration upset the expected bounds of this event. However, it revealed an unexpected axis of cultural differentiation. The Council requests an explanation, not of the reaction, but its purpose. Riley stepped forward, still damp in places. He looked up at the galaxy's best minds. They'd invented quantum fission and memory liquid computing, terraformed moons, and mapped dark energy spirals. And here he was, trying to explain party tricks. Look, he said, we're a weird species. Sometimes we build particle accelerators, sometimes we mix kitchen stuff to see if it explodes. I think both are science. One's for understanding the universe. The other's for understanding how to have fun with it. A few aliens blinked. We like seeing cause and effect, he continued. But we also like surprise. That soda thing, it's controlled. You know it's going to erupt. But the size, the spray, how high, it's never exactly the same. It makes kids scream and adults laugh, and someone always gets wet. It's not about control. It's about letting go, just a little. He paused, nervous again. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, but back home, that's chemistry too. We don't separate fun from learning. Sometimes we need a mess to understand something better. Professor Xaerthal was silent for a long time. Then, slowly, he said, "Thank you." A chime echoed across the hall. The deliberation was about to begin. As Riley was escorted out again, he heard whispers behind him. Not angry ones, curious ones. The Velix was already sketching the geyser shape on a hovering canvas. Later that rotation. The Council's decision was unanimous. The Mentos Soda event was officially classified in the Galactic database under Class 3, Reactionary Events. Recreational, uncontrolled volatility, terrestrial origin. New symposium regulations were passed. No demonstrations from species known to weaponize snack foods. The Vesh delegate, now safely re-robed, gave a reluctant nod when the motion passed. Riley's clearance was reinstated. His snacks remained under observation, but his status shifted from detainee to cultural outlier with experimental merit. He didn't quite know how to feel about that. As he packed his bag to return to his dorm, he noticed something new. Several alien students walking past, whispering to one another, clutching sealed beverage containers and what looked suspiciously like synthetic candy analogs. Riley exhaled through his nose, then muttered to himself, "Please don't try it with sulfur juice." 2 days had passed since the Mentos incident, and Riley still smelled like carbonation. No matter how many times he scrubbed, there was always a faint undertone of sweet syrup in his clothes, hair, even his shoes. At this point, he'd stopped trying to explain and had started calling it a cultural musk. Most species kept their distance, not out of hostility, but because now, Riley wasn't just the human, he was the human who made the sugar bomb. Officially, the symposium had moved on. Presentations resumed. Quantum emulsifiers whirred, bioplasma stretched across magnetic scaffolds, and the usual slow ballet of civilized scientific showmanship continued. Unofficially, however, things were different. Everywhere Riley went, there were whispers. In the atrium garden, 2 slender Menthari were caught huddled behind a potted plant, watching him and murmuring excitedly. On the communal deck, he found a group of adolescent Thuleks poking holes into a sealed nutrient paste tube, apparently trying to simulate terrestrial bubble acceleration. Professor Kyrthal had taken to gently steering him away from certain wings of the symposium, mostly labs labeled pressurized or sensitive to chemical instability, but the professor had not revoked his access. Instead, he'd invited Riley to a private session. It was this invitation that brought Riley, now wearing the cleanest uniform he could find, to the observation deck laboratory 17F. Inside, a group of senior researchers from various species stood behind a transparent barrier, all watching a gloved Zentari technician nervously approach a soda bottle. Beside the technician was a sealed container. Inside it, 1 white mint, perfectly spherical, artificially replicated using nano-weaving and spectrochemical modeling. It was, allegedly, a galactic-class replica of a Mentos. "Wait," Riley said, blinking. "You cloned the mint?" Professor Kyrthal inclined his long head. "For accuracy, we wish to explore your demonstration under stricter controls. We adjusted the soda to match terrestrial molecular composition precisely. No added variables." The technician wearing thick polymer gloves and a trembling visor hesitated, then dropped the mint. The reaction was immediate. A fountain of foam erupted, hitting the containment ceiling and splashing down like fizzing rain. The aliens behind the barrier gasped. Several took notes. One fainted. "I told you it wasn't dangerous," Riley said. "Just sticky." "Yet its behavioral output is inconsistent," said a serpentine researcher. "Each reaction varies." "That's half the fun." Professor Zierthal gestured again. The technician repeated the experiment, this time with a slightly larger bottle. The geyser rose higher, triggering a new alarm. The observation barrier flashed red briefly before stabilizing. By the 5th test, the Zentari technician excused himself, mumbling something about sugar vapor hallucinations and uncontrolled joy surges. One of the senior scholars, a heavy-set, purple-skinned Narluan, leaned toward Riley. "Would you permit us," she asked, "to study your planet's other snack-based reactions? Like what, microwave marshmallows? Gummy worms and soda? Those don't even foam. All chemical events have interpretive merit." Riley rubbed his eyes. "You people are going to start a food fight across the galaxy, aren't you?" Later that evening, back in his dorm, Riley received a message from Earth. It came through the slower relay text only, a bit delayed, from Dr. Harding, his mentor back at Western Coast University. "Heard about the Mentos thing. Impressive, or catastrophic. Jury's out. Got mentioned in an academic podcast. You're officially the fizzy pioneer now. Also, your Mars visa might get revoked if this goes galactic. Stay safe." Riley laughed out loud, which startled the monitoring drone in the ceiling corner. He gave it a little wave. Then his smile faded. Because the message came with an attachment. A short news clip from a colony station in Europa's orbit. A group of bored teens, human and alien, had tried replicating the reaction, with hydrogen-infused soda. The foam ignited. Nobody died, but one alien's tactile sensors were mildly burned. The colony banned Earth-originated confections the next day. The implication sank into Riley's stomach like a lead cookie. The emergency panel. By the following morning, the symposium's ruling committee summoned an emergency roundtable. Alien officials, cultural liaisons, and interspecies safety officers filled the long chamber. In the center, Riley. Again. "I didn't ask them to do that," he said, for the third time. "That's not what the Mentos demo was for. They added volatile components. That's not how we do it." "It has become a meme," said the Ur ambassador gravely. "A concept virus. Younglings across systems are attempting fizz stunts. This is educational fallout," the Krovith ambassador said. "Irresponsible dissemination of recreational chemistry." "I didn't disseminate anything," Riley shot back. "You guys recorded it. You replicated the mint. I didn't even post anything." The room murmured. A digital hologram spun above the table. It showed dozens of species attempting similar reactions with local ingredients. Some produced fountains, some exploded, some melted into goo and ran down drainage shafts. One species had tried it with a pressurized caffeine jelly. It was now banned on 2 moons. Professor Zierthal cleared his throat. "We are not here to place blame, but we must acknowledge the cultural impact." Riley stood slowly. He was tired, still sore from when he'd slipped on a wet deck tile the night before, bruising his hip lightly, but enough that the med tech insisted on a scan. "I didn't mean for this to spread, but maybe it's good it did," he said. "You're seeing what happens when curiosity isn't gated by fear. Sometimes it's messy, sometimes it's dumb, but it's how we figure things out. You tried replicating it. That's not just my species." "Are you defending chaos as pedagogy?" asked a crystalline being. "I'm defending curiosity," Riley said. "We make messes. That's how we learn." The room was quiet. Then the Velix delegate stood. "I propose," it said calmly, "that the human be appointed temporary adjunct of low-tech chaos sciences, with oversight, limited authority, and no access to compound labs unsupervised." Riley blinked. "Wait, is that a job?" "Yes," said Zierthal, "and it comes with responsibility, and a badge." 3 days later, Riley sat in a safe zone lab with reinforced glass, coaching 2 alien students through a controlled Mentos reaction using native carbonated mineral sap. He wore a badge that read Adjunct, Terrestrial Recreational Chemistry, Tier 1. A week prior, he'd been an exchange student. Now, he was cited in 2 symposium papers and had a research topic titled Recreational Volatility Among Non-Terrestrial Sapients, Lessons from Human Culinary Reactions. In his off time, he started designing a slideshow presentation titled, Don't Try This with Acid-Base Liquids, Seriously. Meanwhile, across the station, a Zentari professor worked quietly in Lab 9B. Clad in thick gloves, visor down, he held a soda bottle with robotic arms. With almost ceremonial reverence, he raised a replicated mint. "For science," he whispered. The mint dropped. A high-pressure geyser exploded upward. It splashed into the containment field with a wet, thunderous slap. The professor gave a delighted squeal and reached for a notepad. The age of snack science had begun. 1 lunar cycle after the carbonic Mentos event, the Zenthari Satellite Research Hub reeked faintly of artificial sweeteners and caution. The Mentos reaction had not only been replicated in dozens of controlled lab environments, it had spread like wildfire through academic forums, youth collectives, and even a few underground entertainment streams. Now, chemical safety notices hung across every corridor like polite threats. Do not drop anything into pressurized containers without clearance. Riley's favorite was the one outside the communal hydration chamber. All carbonated fluids monitored, no exceptions. He was sitting in the new snack compound containment wing, reorganizing the research shelf for the 4th time. The compartments were labeled neatly: candy, volatile, syrup, pressurized, sugar-based solids, experimentally approved, and one lonely bin marked chocolate, not reactive yet. His comlink buzzed. Message from Professor Zierthal. Please report to High Conference Hall D. Dress appropriately. Vesht delegation has arrived. Riley groaned. His bruised hip still ached when he stood up too fast. He hadn't forgotten how that happened, slipping on soda foam while trying to retrieve a Mentos replica during a safe replication drill. The medtech had been surprisingly understanding, though it took a full week before he could walk without wincing. The recovery aligned exactly with what the human body could handle: one bone-deep bruise, several soft tissue contusions, a lot of limping, and more lectures on personal protective gear protocols than he could count. After a quick shirt change and a slap of deodorizing gel, he made his way to Hall D. This time, there were no alarms, no panicked diplomats, and crucially no soda bottles. Inside the chamber, Professor Zierthal stood at the center, his long fingers folded neatly behind his back. On one side, the Vesh diplomatic delegation shimmered like hot glass. Their outer garments were matte now, non-reactive and neutral in composition. The ambassador's acid scars had mostly healed, but a visible discoloration along one limb indicated permanent dermal alteration. Riley approached slowly. "Sir," he said, nodding once to the ambassador. "Ma'am, or just ambassador?" The Vesh's voice box translated into trade tongue with its usual delay. "We accept your offering." Riley blinked. "I didn't offer anything yet." A small assistant stepped forward, holding a hexagonal tray. On it sat a wrapped item covered in sterile foil. Non-carbonated, non-phosphoric, Terra origin. Crunch-coated popcorn? Searthal whispered. It was the safest snack we could find. The Vesht ambassador extended a gloved pseudopod, lifted the package, and gave it a sniff. The assistant translated a series of complex whistles and chirps. "She says. It smells of cautious curiosity. This is acceptable." There was a long pause. "Also," the ambassador added, "the reaction you performed during the symposium has been reclassified within Vesht cultural records." Riley's heart skipped. Reclassified as what? Unintentional diplomatic catalyst. The room remained silent for several beats. Then, Searthal gave a slight nod. "That is unexpectedly generous." "It is practical," the Vesht replied. "Our younglings now reference the incident in debate cycles. There are artistic renditions. One is titled, 'The Sweet Eruption of War That Was Not.'" "I'd buy a print of that," Riley said before he could stop himself. To his surprise, the ambassador didn't take offense. "If your species can produce chemical chaos without direct aggression," the Vesht continued, "then perhaps you are not dangerous, merely unstructured." "Yeah," Riley said, "that checks out." 3 days later, the first cross-cultural snack protocol summit was convened. It was not mandatory, but attendance was unexpectedly high. Representatives from 38 species gathered to discuss the implications of chemically reactive food items in shared environments. Riley was asked to give the keynote. He stood before the crowd, a few bruises lighter and a little wiser. "I didn't come here to start a chemical incident," he said. "I thought I was showing off a silly human trick. Turns out, I was demonstrating one of our most dangerous qualities: curiosity without a leash." He scanned the room. A few delegates nodded. Others blinked slowly. "But I also showed you something else. We don't always need high tech to get your attention. Sometimes a bottle and a mint are enough to teach a dozen lessons in physics, pressure, and unpredictability. And if nothing else, maybe we learned that snacks aren't always safe." Mild laughter echoed around the room. It was the closest thing to applause Riley had heard all month. Epilogue. Earth, 6 weeks later. Back on Earth, Riley stepped off the transport pod and into the clean, breathable, still soda-scented air of the Mars-Earth orbital shuttle dock. His bag held a dozen carefully packed documents, a new academic ID badge, and an encrypted flash crystal labeled Snack-Based Volatility Case Studies, Non-Classified. He had just enough time to get to the university before orientation for new students began. His return had been delayed twice, once due to a customs issue with gummy worms, and once because a Zenthari postdoc refused to let him leave without reviewing his marshmallow elasticity under microwave conditions proposal. When he entered Dr. Harding's office, she looked up from her console with a grin. "So," she said, "blow anything else up?" "Just a few reputations," Riley replied. "Good. They're harder to clean up." She tossed him a sealed snack bar. "Be careful," she added. "The Vesht ambassador is giving a lecture at the Interspecies Ethics Conference next month. Rumor has it she'll be bringing diplomatic snack trials into policy discussion." Riley nodded, peeling back the wrapper. Let's just hope nobody brings soda. Meanwhile, in orbit around Neptune, inside a small lab aboard the remote station Venture 6, a Zentari assistant activated a containment field. He stepped back as his mentor, a senior chemist known only as Voltu, carefully positioned a beverage container under a vented shield. Gloves on? Voltu asked. Triple layered. Recorders? Online. Voltu unwrapped a synthetic mint, modeled after the original recovered from Riley's demonstration. For science, he whispered again, and dropped it in. This time, the foam didn't just spray, it spun. Spiral jets twisted upward like a helix, reflecting against the glass, humming with chaotic perfection. The assistant gasped, "It's beautiful." Voltu made a note in his log. Observation: carbonic reaction with terrestrial candy. Unpredictable, illogical, mesmerizing. He paused, then added a final line. Conclusion: humanity's greatest weapon may be wonder.